Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I would like to welcome you at our space panel at the GLOBSEC Conference 2016. First of all, I would like to start with the introduction of our guests. I would like to start with Professor Mazlan Othman.
Yes, hello Daniel.
Hello,
everyone.
And with Mr. Prunariu from Romania, and with Mr. Kai-Uwe Schrögl from the European Space Agency. My first question when talking about the space, what is the resource of the space? Mrs. Othman, please.
Resource is in what makes space important.
Yes, what makes the space important?
That's always a good question. What makes space important? Because most of the time, people don't think about space and how it makes life very easy for you. If I had to choose one aspect of space that's, to me, that's been revolutionary, is telecommunications. Through telecommunications, we can really call ourselves a global village. We can reach anybody in this world. You can get all the live telecasts of almost anything now in this world. And of course, through communication, we can better understand each other, and that's what hopefully makes the world a more peaceful and place for all of us. So I'll choose telecommunications.
Thank you. Mr. Prunariu.
As long as I travel a lot, I would choose the positioning and timing systems. The American GPS, the Russian GLONASS, the Chinese Baidu, and the European Galileo systems, they are contributing a lot to the well-functioning of our today's society. Not only transportation, but also the well-functioning of the financial systems. By adapting timing between different financial systems, banks, and so on, is very important. And besides that, traveling, counting distances, times, cars, airplanes, ships, everything is working now in the global environment, dealing, of course, with these global navigation systems.
Thank you very much. Mr. Schrögl, what will be your answer?
Let me take a resource which is not technical and which you cannot really measure. I would take the resource space is providing to us as identity. I think identity is something we need, we are talking about Europe during this conference, and I'm absolutely convinced that we need more identity. So space can provide identity. It can provide an identity, something which is not only philosophical, but which is also political, where we know we are doing things together. And this identity, you can put it as a European identity for our European efforts in outer space, but you can also transcend it then to a global identity. And I think together with the very important issues, the technology, the progress, the development, the security and so on, identity is something which you could also regard as a resource, and we should really cherish it and even think of it as one of the main drivers of space activities.
How does the developing countries recognize space as an important issue?
Yeah, I would respond to Kai-Uwe's idea of identity. And I like that idea too, because, and as a resource, sure. And that is where the developing countries need also to develop that identity. Previously, I mean, even now people ask, why should the developing countries venture into space technology or space science? After all, the rest, the developed countries are already can provide the services. But it's about identity, and it's about solving your own problems yourself. I'll give an example where most of the satellites are now in the polar orbits. They go from North Pole to South Pole, and so the result of that is that the regions on the equator are not well covered. And so countries along the equator, to solve their own problems, they need to send their satellites to the equatorial orbit. So that's about the identity that we need. I mean, that's a niche area, that's a unique area. The countries on the equatorial belt needs to take care of for themselves. Because why would the Americans or the Europeans send their satellites on the equatorial orbit, which does not benefit them at all? So I love this idea of identity, because it fits into your question to me, which is why, how do the developing countries treat space? Of course, we have all the benefits of space, but also it's our identity.
Mr. Prunariu, you are also a former cosmonaut. How did you feel your identity once you've been in outer space?
Actually, I would take the example of my country, Romania. Because it's the same example I could take about any Eastern European country or Central European country. Actually, we together with Slovakia, with Czech Republic now, with Poland, Hungary, Bulgaria, started to deal with space in the years 67, 68, when the Intercosmos program started. So we developed our own institutions dealing with space, research institutions, develop our specialists. They were trained in the country, abroad. We started an international program to develop our own capacities. And in the years of 80s, we launched, together with the Russian colleagues in that time, we launched the first cosmonauts, just to accomplish more complex experiment that could be accomplished in an automatic way. Me, as a cosmonaut, I approach this activity, space field, in 78. I flew into space in 81, and starting with that year, I was permanently involved in space activities. After 89, I had the opportunity to approach a lot of international organizations, by instance, the UN. I was the chairman of the United Nations Committee on the Peaceful Uses of Outer Space. Now, we, Romania, and other European countries, Eastern European countries, I mean, became members of ESA. The Czech Republic was the first one in 2008. In the end of 2011, Romania signed the agreement to become a member of ESA, and now more and more countries, Poland, Hungary. Being a member of the European Space Agency, we are now acting at the European level. Cooperation is very important for us. Our identity, it's in Europe. And our cooperation at the European level is important not only because we provide our expertise to Europe, but also because we learn a lot from Europe. We accomplish a lot of experiments in our country, programs. We manage some space programs together with our European colleagues. And me, as a former cosmonaut, I have the opportunity to express my training in different other ways than only by flying into space. For instance, now I'm the vice chair of the International Relations Committee of ESA. And so on. I deal with the Association of Space Explorers. The Association of Space Explorers, it's actually the association of quite all astronauts and cosmonauts in the world. We organized this association in 1985 just to show to the world that we astronauts and cosmonauts understand the world a little bit differently. The conflicts are not part of our work. Also, the understanding of both Eastern and Western parts of the world in that time, in 1985, during the Cold War, was a major concern for us. And we really realized a unity between astronauts and cosmonauts that have seen the world from outside and understood that only our common cooperation, our common actions could lead to the long-term sustainability of outer space and to a long-term sustainability of all activities on the world. So that was my experience as a cosmonaut and as a person belonging to this part of Europe.
Mr. Schrögl, as a representative of the European Space Agency, how does your agency, which unites the European states, consider the sustainability in outer space and the future?
Well, let me first elaborate on the identity issue because it would feed in quite well with what Mazlan and Dorin just said. Now, when you think of Europe, do we have so many things which really grasp European identity? Think of a few. You will certainly say, first of all, UEFA, Champions League. Okay, that's a worthwhile area, I would say. Then some of you with a little bit more culture will think the European Song Contest. But then think of what really constitutes European identity. Is it the euro? Certainly not. Not every country in Europe has the euro. And then you will find out that we do not have so many elements which epitomize European identity. On the technology side, you might come up with, for example, Airbus, the joint airplane we have. But what else do we have? So space can be and actually is an element of building European identity. What we have at ESA is, for example, a European astronauts corps. We do not have a French astronaut, a German astronaut, a Danish astronaut, but we have astronauts which are European. Of course, they are of origin, European astronaut of French origin, a European astronaut of German origin, but they are European astronauts. All our missions, when they go, and you have seen a few of them, when they go out in the solar system, when they detect the Earth, they are European activities. And nothing really better shows and epitomizes the identity issue as cosmonauts and astronauts, because they go out there, have a task, represent a country, but even more so a global endeavor. They look down, and maybe Dorin can elaborate on that a little bit later. They look down, they don't see any frontiers, they see just the globe, they just see the land, and they don't see frontiers. And this is something which really can help us better understand and better sensitize and feel what we should do and what we should aim for. And this is then the matter of identity. And I also already said there is European identity. There's also European pride in that, what we are doing and what we are accomplishing. But then it's also a global endeavor. The space station, as you know it's almost global. It does not comprise China, it does not comprise India, other developing countries, but you can be sure, and maybe we come back to that a little later, when we do have a next endeavor for and in the field of exploration, going back to the moon or going to Mars, this will be a global endeavor. And there will be not only Europe, there will be not single European states, it will be a global activity. And this will create global identity, and this is necessary. And I think we can be glad that we have something at hand like space activities which could contribute to that purpose.
Madam Othman, you are the former director of the United Nations Office for Outer Space Affairs. Talking about the global activities, is there a unified idea where the humanity should go in outer space?
Well, it's always been my dream, even before I joined the United Nations, that the next adventure, a human adventure out to space would be a global one. And I have every confidence, in fact, that it will be global. Not only because we have a certain sense of global community, but because I think no one country can afford to make that leap out to explore the moon or Mars by themselves. Definitely you see a lot of cooperation already. Of course, the Americans need to start working with the Chinese because those are the two biggest forces going out to space right now. And that will come, that will have to come. Because I think even all the discussions we have here in China is always that elephant in the room nobody talks about, and it's the same with space. So I believe that you need to bring the developing countries into the picture for several reasons. Firstly, the more countries you have with vested interest in space, the more people will want to protect their interests in space. Developing countries will bring the diversity that we need in terms of approaching a problem. And developing countries also bring resources to the table, human capital, funding, innovation, and we should not overlook that. And I think by having developing countries at the negotiating table, whatever it is you're negotiating in terms of going out into space, the better prepared you are to be able to represent all of humanity. So it's always my dream that that first team of human beings that land on Mars will be an international one.
So, yeah, Mr.
May I
Prunariu.
continue a little bit with this aspect of the cooperation? You see now, you have a full view of the geopolitical things happening at a global level now. Big differences, wars and so on. But you look at the space, the best cooperation now is developing in the space field. The Americans fly with the Russian spacecrafts. They work together on board the International Space Station. Many other nations work together on board the International Space Station. There are already new contracts between the USA and the Russian Federation for further flying into space. And also there are cooperations between Europe and the Russian Federation as well. 1 month ago, we launched the ExoMars, the first module of the ExoMars into space. It represents a very good cooperation between the European Space Agency and the Russian Federation. So we see in the space domain, the cooperation plays a very important role, and it really shows the real interest of the humanity. On the other hand, I would put the problem from another perspective. On board the space station, they work usually 6 astronauts, cosmonauts, all together. They belong to different nationalities. They have different cultures, different religions. But in the same time, of each of them depends the life of the others. You have to accomplish your work on board the space station, not taking into account your training, your culture, your religion. You have to take care of others. If you don't do your work, some other members of the crew have to take your obligations to be accomplished up there. In this way, you are very responsible of all others, and you are responsible of your work. When you come back from the outer space, you just keep this way of thinking and want to apply at a global level. And we promote this idea that of each of us depends the welfare and the security of all planet. On the actions of each of us, of each nations, depend also the good understanding and the good cooperation at the global level. That was my meaning with respect to what you asked for, Mazlan. Some other questions? Okay.
Well, Madam Othman, we pointed a very interesting question, is the question of financing.
Yes.
Do we finance enough space activities? Do we too much or too less?
Well, people will ask you, what are your priorities? There's poverty, there are bridges to be built, schools to be built. Why space? And so instead of answering your question, is there enough finance? I'd like to turn it around and say, why should we invest in space? And if you ask a country like Malaysia, for instance, why do we have a space program? It's not about national prestige, no. We've gone past that point. But it's about completing the picture of the development of science and technology. And because space is going to be a very important element of the developments in the future, we have to bring our investment into space, into the space arena. Also, space pushes the envelope for science, pushes the envelope for technology. So we're looking for innovation in this. Why space has always been driving innovation. That's where we want to be, to having space drive our own innovation. So is there enough money going into space? Probably not. But should we put money in space? Yes. And of course, within the present economic situation, the first thing that's, I don't know about Europe, but in Malaysia at least, the first thing that gets cut is of course space, but we still need to be doing some things. And as I said, we have to invest in space if we want to invest in the future.
Investment in the future is the space. I would like to turn to the questions from the audience. Well, the most votes at this moment, they get the question on the space debris and the how do we get out of the dangerous pieces orbiting the Earth. Mr. Schrögl, as the representative of the European Space Agency, very active also in the space last decades. What is your personal opinion? What is the future towards this issue? And are there already measures taken by the ESA or the other international agencies?
I can even present you with an official position if you wish. But my personal opinion is even stronger. In the past and up to now, we have only produced trash. We, however, realized that there is a problem, let's say 20 years ago, and have started to take measures to mitigate the production of space debris, which means make less space debris and take care that whatever we are doing is, let's say, environmental friendly, at least more environmental friendly than in the past in the 60s, 70s, and 80s. Now, we are at a turning point. We have realized we should and have to do something more active, which is cleaning up. And of course, you cannot simply go up there, have a hovercraft in outer space, because there is vacuum, not so tricky. You also should not, from here, from the Earth, go with lasers and try to shoot down the space debris. It's too easy then to hit a satellite, maybe a military satellite of the one or the other friendly or less friendly power. So you have to come up with smarter ideas, and with ideas which work and which do not produce even more trouble and problems. So what we are planning is to first take out bigger objects which are critical if they explode or if they are hit, that they would produce even more space debris. And following that, we will try to see how we can, in specific areas of outer space where we have a lot of satellites and a lot of satellite traffic, where we then can also take out the smaller bits and pieces. But this is still, I must be realistic, this is still, let's say, 5-10 years away from testing the technical concepts, and then maybe in 15 or so years as operational services, maybe even done on a commercial basis, which would be an encouragement also to get investment for that. But one thing is clear, and this is a positive thing. All states are aware of the problem, and all are ready to contribute in the one way or the other in at least mitigating, and then possibly in the future of actively removing debris in order to make the space environment still safe also for the next generations.
Would you like to comment on that?
So what I want to say is the fact that all three of us are very much connected with this problem. Because the problem is approached for a long time by the UN Committee on the Peaceful Uses of Outer Space. Mazlan was the head of the Office for Outer Space Affairs for many years in Vienna. I was the chairman of the Scientific and Technical Subcommittee of COPOS and then of the full committee. Kai-Uwe also was the chairman of the Legal Subcommittee of COPOS. So at this level, we deal with this problem. So there are some guidelines. issued by the United Nations, issued by different other organizations. These guidelines offer a platform to not produce more space debris than they are now. Even if some member states of the UN, they apply more or less these guidelines. But they exist. They are agreed by all member states of the UN, and most of the space agencies, they elaborate on these guidelines and change the technology to bring back the debris as long as they produce it. When they launch the spacecraft, the last stage of the rocket usually remains in the outer space. Now they are obliged to take it back. Also, the non-active satellites. There are some recommendations to have some engines on board, to turn them on, and to bring the unfunctional satellites in the atmosphere, and then it burns in the atmosphere. So first thing is to not produce any more space debris. The second thing is how to remove them. I can tell you that sometimes once in a month, once in 2 months, the space stations makes maneuvers into space just to avoid the collision with space debris. It's really a very concerning problem for all of us.
I'd like to add that at the United Nations, there is the guidelines on space debris mitigation. I was the chair of the scientific subcommittee when that happened. Yeah, it was one of the achievements of the scientific scientific and technical subcommittee. However, they are only guidelines, and therefore they're not legally binding, and a lot of countries don't feel that it is strong enough. But there is no appetite in the United Nations at the moment, or particularly within COPOS, to come up with new treaties. But I think what is more important is what we all can do at the national level. And of course, Europe has its own maybe rules and regulations about space debris. I know the United States has quite strict rules and regulations about it, and there are ISO standards on this issue. So I think it has to go down to the national level, and we all make a commitment to prevent any more space debris.
That was exactly my question, how serious taking the measures by the national states. And you answered partially
it's fairly serious, and there is an agenda item, I think, in the legal subcommittee, maybe Kai-Uwe might elaborate, where the member states inform the subcommittee or COPOS what they are doing in terms of mitigating space debris. Isn't that right?
Right. If I may, the investment in space debris mitigation as well as removal is of course high. You don't get environmental friendliness and cleaning up the environment for free. So there have to be countries or groups of countries, like in the European Space Agency, in ESA, which are ready to invest. And indeed, ESA has the ambition to do the very first removal mission of a big dead satellite. We have one rather large satellite, big like a bus, in an orbit around 800 kilometers. It's there for thousands of years if we do not remove it. Nothing does necessarily have to happen to this satellite, but if this satellite is hit either by another space debris or by a meteorite or whatever, a natural cause, it might explode into thousands of pieces. Other countries have, in particular Soviet Union, Russia, United States, have comparable objects out there. But Europe says, okay, we go one step further in than simply investing in mitigation, saying we try to get that big, dangerous satellite back and make it evaporate in the Earth's atmosphere, and a few pieces will fall into the ocean. This will cost money, a lot of money. Nobody has ever so far, amongst the space countries, has been said, well, we are ready to invest a lot of money into that. Of course, it's also interesting and a thrilling task for engineers to come up with good and interesting and working concepts to take out a satellite from orbit and take it down into the atmosphere for a few hundred kilometers. That's not a simple task, and it's something really challenging. But we said we will do that. Now, we will have a ministerial conference at the end of the year, and we will propose to our member states to have studies and eventually come up with the funding for such a mission, which might take place in a time frame of 5 to 6 years. So this would make a clear signal that the next step has to be made, that there is Europe ready to make such an investment for the benefit also of all spacefaring nations. And I just can hope that our member states will be convinced by our concepts in going ahead with such a mission.
Just one statistical comment on the space debris. At this moment, we have roughly 1,400 active satellites on orbit.
That's right.
But then we have between 4,000 to 5,000 inactive satellites, and more than tens of thousands space debris. The ESA mission could be an example, but are we ready to face this increasing problem in the future, and is the collaboration key for doing so? Madam Othman.
Yeah, I think Kai-Uwe has mentioned, some of the ideas we have for cleaning up the debris, because right now when you're talking about tens of thousands of space debris, those are things that can be observed. For those that you can't observe, they're even larger in number. So we'll see how what technology will win over the others in terms of the time it takes to develop the technology, the cost. But I love this idea of bringing back this, making sure this particular satellite that shall remain unnamed, is it? Oh. Back. Yeah, it's a fantastic idea, and I do hope you can demonstrate that.
Is there any question in the audience? Yes, please.
Is anybody solving the question how would be active space debris removal financed on the global level? For example, in the UN.
In the UN, no, we don't have money for that sort of thing. So that's my simple answer. But maybe Kai-Uwe might, or Dorian might have an answer.
So the problem is not to do it at a global level. I mean, to have a global organization doing such things. In the framework of the UN, we adopt some decisions, resolutions, and the member states start to apply. It's quite impossible to adopt now legally binding treaties on space debris, but that is the reason that we have guidelines. But the guidelines could become in the future real agreements, documents between countries, between communities, between entities, and so on. Now, all these things depend on space agencies. Different space agencies, including the European Space Agency, as Kai-Uwe mentioned, have plans to remove space debris. The best example is what was just given by Kai-Uwe. Of course, some other space agency could have some initiatives in this respect, but this is not yet a global approach. Global, it's too much for such very specific things where the money comes from different nations. They don't come from an international fund or something.
Well, if I just step in the end, it might be a fund. You will not get that voluntarily. Also, ESA will not start to spend then billions and billions of cleaning up. In the end, there have been plans which might actually materialize, that there is a tax for using space. A tax where you have to pay in a fund, as Dorian says, maybe. And this fund then will be used for cleaning up. Or there might be ideas to commercialize that, to then make it possible for private companies also to get in the garbage and get paid for that by the users. These are ideas which now sound completely unrealistic, because we do not have any such readiness also of the states to adapt things which we are now learned to adapt in the field of the environment, for example, where you also tax the emission of CO2. Nobody has or would have thought that we could have taxes on CO2, let's say 20 years ago. Nobody, absolutely nobody. And now nobody thinks this is possible for space. So I'm absolutely convinced that we will see a change in attitude also for that. It's not foreseeable when, it's not foreseeable how it will come about, but I'm absolutely convinced that in 10, 20 years we will have a real change in thinking, approaching, and in attitude then in the end.
Yes, please.
I'm all for us dealing with space debris or orbital debris, but there arises the question, who should be responsible for removing the debris? And a lot of countries will argue that for those who have not been responsible for producing the debris, like in climate change issues, should they then have to fork out the money to clean outer space? So there are some political issues that will have to be resolved, just like they're being resolved now for climate change. But I think but the writing is on the wall, as they say. We have to deal with space debris. Who's going to pay, how, when? It's just a matter of negotiation.
Leaving the discussion on the space debris, when the states will take seriously in their foreign policies the space as an important issue?
So actually, space, it's an important issue in the policy of different states. In the same time, space systems, as they became key enablers for a wide variety of commercial, scientific, and military applications, they really represent a very important issue for many states, not for all of them, but for many states. Some of the systems became deeply embedded in functioning of advanced societies, such as those of the European Union, by instance, supporting the economy, governance processes, and the lifestyle of the consumers and beneficiaries. Taking into account all these things, the space is really an important issue for many, many governments. The increasing dependency on certain space systems placed them firmly in the area of critical infrastructures. And critical infrastructures are structures that if they don't function, they affect all society, all of our society, all economy, and so on. Taking into account how important are satellites now, space assets for communications, for weather, for navigation, for remote sensing, having images from outer space for different activities, including from military purposes. Any intrusion in a space systems could cause a big failure of different fields of activity. So they are very important for our society, and they are very important to be considered as such, as critical infrastructure, treated as such.
We haven't mentioned yet the dual-use aspect of the space technology, military and civil. Which one prevails? Is the civil side or the military side? Mr. Schrögl.
Why me? and I tell you why I ask, why me? ESA is an organization, by its statutes, it's an organization which is dealing exclusively with peaceful purposes. So, on the other hand, peaceful uses does not prevent us also from using space for security. What is the absolute red line is that we will never ever use space for purposes which are aggressive, and we will never ever dispose weapons in outer space. So this is the absolute bottom line, red line for ESA, and there you can be sure that we will not enter into that. We will not do anti-satellite tests or even anti-satellite missions. This is completely out of order. However, on the other hand, we see that there are a lot of security issues on Earth. And, well, we are talking here at this conference also about the security issues. Security issues are not only military security, but it is also environmental security, it's energy security. Well, some critics say, well, we have a securization of the whole society, but indeed there are more and more policy aspects which are and have to be seen under the question of security. And for all these purposes, space is also providing a tool. So space is not the solution to any of these problems, but it provides a tool to assess and also to manage the problems. And we could go, maybe in a later stage, go through specific problems like that. It's also about the issue of migration, how to see and understand better what is happening, and also to make sure that nobody is dying on the ways over the sea and on the tracks, in the camps and so on. So space is an important tool for those purposes. And from that perspective, we haven't had much change since the very beginning. Every space technology has been a dual-use technology, be it the rocket, be it the re-entry, be it the first applications. An Earth observation satellite can be used for civilian purposes as well as for military purposes. But the essence is that this has not really changed, but that there are organizations like ours which are very conscious that there is still a line which we have to draw between the peaceful uses, which can comprise dual use and space for security purposes, and then the military use with the aggressive note and the weaponization.
I want to give you some numbers, just to understand how many satellites are in orbit, how many are military, how many are civilians, how many are commercial, and so on. So at the end of the last year, of the 2015, the total number of operating satellites was 1,381, from which 568 belonging to the USA, 177 to China, 133 to the Russian Federation, and 503 to other entities. 273 of these satellites are commercial, 15 civil, 149 military, and 131 governmental. In the same time, I want to stress one thing. About 90% of the military traffic passes through civilian satellites, many with a private owner, and not through dedicated system designed to be resilient to various means of interrupting their functioning. Furthermore, 68% of American ammunition used in Iraq between 2003 and 2011 was guided through satellites, while only 10% was guided in the same manner during the Gulf War from 90 to 91. This showed the increasing military dependence on vulnerable space assets and on the civilian satellites, commercial ones.
Thank you for the statistical introduction, which sounds really interesting and makes an impression that we are more and more depending on the satellite communication data. Madam Othman, you would like to react on that?
Yeah, I was, of course, with respect to dual use of space, it's going to be with us from now on. There's no way that we are going to be able to say, no, we cannot use satellites for militarization, because you have to define what militarization means. If militarization means that we're using those assets for helping us, with our military activities, then it's already militarized. The only thing is whether or not we want to weaponize space. And of course, that's a great no, and we agree to that. But you're asking the question of how well will space fit into the political domain before? And I'm thinking straight away of the US presidential elections at the moment. And you'll realize very quickly that even though the US is the biggest, the most important spacefaring nation in the world, it doesn't factor at all into the discussions when you talk about during the presidential elections, except when maybe when they're in Florida, they need to talk about it. But it's peripheral, even in the US context. Well, I don't know whether how big it is in the European context, but of course in the domain, in the political domain in the developing countries, it's not there. And the reason is it could be suicidal, because you're going to talk about space, which is highly capital. You need a lot of capital investment. That's not a good thing to bring up.
We have roughly 10 minutes to go. Are there any questions in the audience? Yes, please.
Hello, good evening. My name is Tomáš Rozenský. I'm from Slovak Space Policy Association. I would like to build upon Professor Schrögl's idea about global identity that could be achieved through space activities. And I sincerely agree with this statement. And if we agree that space is not being given enough money, I think maybe we should specify the right projects and then encourage further investment in these projects. And so, since the topic of this panel is destination space, I would like to ask the panelists what would benefit mankind the most. Should we invest more into space exploration, go deeper and further into the uncharted territories of outer space, or for the time being should we focus more on the utilization of Earth orbits? Thank you.
Who would like to start? Mr. Prunariu.
So what I can say is that exploration is very important. If we don't explore, we don't utilize. We don't find new things to utilize into outer space. So the exploration is characteristic to the human race. We want to know what is up there, what is farther, what's on Mars, what's on other planets, what's on the satellites of other planets, if life exists in the universe, why it exists, how it exists, and so on. But the most important thing is that we explore to find out more about our own planet. We explore Mars now to find out what happened to Mars millions of years ago, why on Mars there are traces of water, but water doesn't exist in the form it exists on Earth, to find out if life existed sometimes on Mars and why it doesn't exist now, so on, to find out what could happen to on Earth and to take measures to survive. This is one of the most important things. So, I leave to you also some considerations.
Yes,
to you.
Madam.
There has to be a balance. To get political traction, you must talk about space in the context of benefiting the Earth. What's going to do for precision agriculture, everything. But I think in the end, when you really want to inspire the people, as Doreen says, people talk about exploration. I'll give you an example of my own experience. When I first set up the National Space Agency in Malaysia, I talked about satellites and how they're going to be beneficial for maritime, agriculture. But every time I spoke to the press or to the public, they would ask me, now that we have a space agency, when are we going to send the first Malaysian into space? So the first time I hear this, I say, no, we're not into that, you know. And I said again about satellites. But after the third time, and I'm asked this question by the public, why are we not sending a Malaysian to space? I start to wonder, and I thought to myself, the problem is people cannot relate to a satellite or even a rocket. Even if they see this rocket launch, it's only a few seconds, and then they don't relate to it anymore. And of course, they cannot relate themselves to a satellite which they cannot see. But when they see their own citizen in space, that's when they start to have a feeling for what is important in space, for what inspires people to go into space. So
it's also the question of identity.
Yes, yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. Mr. Schrögl.
Well, your question, where to invest? My response might surprise you. everywhere. Of course, everywhere. And the reason for that is the following. Now, you are a member of a society. We are so glad that there are so many grassroots institutions, societies, associations which deal with space. In countries on the European level, there is also one on the global level, the Space Generation Advisory Council, which is fantastic and instrumental in bringing together young people from all over the world in more than 100 countries with one dream and one expectation, and this is space is something which changes our life. Now, these societies, would you say or restrict your interest and your field in space on one specific area, only in human spaceflight or exploration, or only in applications? Certainly not. For you also, and for us as well as the agencies, space is encompassing all these aspects. And this makes space a particularly valuable policy area and technology area, because all the elements create these synergies where from one area you can transfer to the other, you can benefit from the one and create extra benefits in the other. So we also in ESA see space as one comprehensive field where you have to invest in a balanced way. And this is what we tell our member states, and our member states tell us. That's the beauty also of Europe. We have 22 member states where a group of member states are very much interested in this field, another group is interested in another field, and this comes together, we make packages, and through that we really can cover then the whole field of space, which is then for the benefit of all of Europe and all our member states. And this is also driven by the interest of the public, by associations and by foundations. And this is something which guides also the policy making in that field and creates again identity.
We have roughly last 2 minutes. I would like to make a very quick inquiry in you. Who are the future space leaders? Governments, the states, or the companies? The private interest? Mr. Schrögl.
It will be both.
It will be both.
Yes.
Mr. Prunariu.
Yes, also both. Because you see now, especially in the United States, a lot of private companies take advantage of the necessity to build rockets and to send spacecrafts to the International Space Station. SpaceX, by instance, it's one of the outstanding companies sending privately capsules to the International Space Stations, cargo ships. But in the same times, governments are very important, because in the beginning, for a new field of activity into the outer space, you can't make profit. The space exploration, the investigation of other planets, asteroids and all, they don't bring from the very beginning profit. Where is no profit, no private companies invest. So there is the field where the government should invest in the beginning and then leave the way open for the private companies.
Is space profitable?
Yes, space is very profitable.
I would say so. Space will become profitable in the future, but that's where you must have both the private and the governments and companies both involved in this, because it's not just about profit, but you've got to regulate as well all the players in space. Yep, both get involved.
Thank you very much. I would like to thank everybody, also the audience, and to Mr. Schrögl from the European Space Agency, the head of the policy department, Mr. Prunariu from the Space Explorers Association, and Madam Othman from the Malaysian Academy of Sciences and the former director of the Office for Outer Space Affairs. Thank you very much for coming today.
Thank you.